My husband Marcus kissed me goodbye on a Tuesday morning. Just like he had every weekday for the past 32 years, he straightened his tie in the hallway mirror, the same navy blue tie I'd bought him for Christmas 3 years ago, grabbed his worn leather briefcase, the one with his initials embossed on the side that I'd given him when he made senior accountant, told me he had a late meeting and would be home around 8, and walked out the door to go to his job as a senior accountant. At Morrison & Associates, the same prestigious accounting firm he'd worked at for 23 years, the firm where he'd climbed the ladder from junior accountant to senior partner, the firm whose Christmas parties I'd attended for over 2 decades, where I knew the names of his co-workers, their spouses, their children. Except that afternoon when I called his office to remind him about our daughter Keisha's birthday dinner that evening. His secretary Janet, the woman who'd been answering his phone for the past 8 years, answered and said something that made my blood run cold and my world tilt on its axis. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but there's no Marcus Thompson working here. And according to our records, there hasn't been a Marcus Thompson employed at Morrison & Associates for the past 5 years. I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story from. I want to know how far it's traveled, because this story, this impossible, unbelievable story, is true, every word of it. And if it can happen to me after 32 years of what I thought was a solid marriage, it can happen to anyone. My name is Gloria Thompson. I'm 50, 6 years old, and until that phone call, until Janet's words shattered my reality, I thought I had a perfectly normal marriage, a perfectly predictable, comfortable life. Marcus and I met when we were in our early 20s at a church social in Detroit. He was studying accounting at Wayne State University, and I was working as a receptionist at a law firm, saving money to go back to school. He was handsome in a quiet, serious way, tall with kind eyes and a smile that took a while to earn, but was worth the wait. We dated for 2 years, got married when I was 24, in a small ceremony at my mama's church, had our first daughter, Shanice, a year later, and our second daughter, Keisha. 3 years after that, we bought a modest 3-bedroom house in a nice suburb with good schools, a small backyard, and a mortgage we could afford. We went to Greater Faith Baptist Church every Sunday morning, sat in the same pew, 3rd row from the front. On the right, had the same friends, the Johnsons. The Washingtons, the Clarks had cookouts in the summer, where Marcus would man the grill, making his famous barbecue ribs, took modest vacations once a year, usually driving down to visit my sister in Atlanta or his brother in Memphis. We were just regular people living a regular middle-class, Black American life, working hard, raising our daughters, trying to build something stable, something lasting, or so I thought when Janet said those words, "There's no Marcus Thompson working here," and according to our records, there hasn't been for the past 5 years. I actually laughed out loud, standing there in my kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear, because it had to be a mistake. It had to be some kind of computer error or clerical confusion, or maybe Janet was new and didn't know how to use their system properly, because my husband Marcus Thompson had worked at Morrison & Associates for 23 years. I had the timeline memorized. He started there right out of college as a junior accountant in their tax division, worked his way up to senior accountant, then to account manager, then to senior partner. Just 2 years ago, we'd celebrated that promotion with a nice dinner at the Capitol Grill, where Marcus had ordered champagne, and told me, "This is it, Gloria. This is what we've been working toward all these years: security, stability, a future for our girls." I'd been so proud of him sitting across that table, watching him smile in a way he didn't smile often. My serious, hard-working husband who'd provided for our family, who'd never missed a mortgage payment, who'd put both our daughters through college without them having to take out loans. "Excuse me," I said to Janet, forcing my voice to stay calm, because surely this was just a misunderstanding. Surely there was a simple explanation. "I think there's been some confusion. My husband, Marcus Thompson, has worked at Morrison & Associates for 23 years. He's a senior partner in your tax division. Could you please check your records again? Maybe he's listed under a different department, Or maybe your computer system isn't showing his full employment history. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a pause that lasted just a beat too long. And in that pause, I felt something cold and heavy settle in my stomach like I'd swallowed a stone. Then Janet said in a very careful, very professional voice that somehow made everything worse, "Ma'am, I've been the receptionist and administrative assistant here at Morrison & Associates for 8 years, and I'm looking at our complete employee database right now. Our system goes back 20 years, and I can see every person who has ever worked here in any capacity we have never had a Marcus Thompson employed in our tax division or any other division. Not in the 20 years this database covers. I even searched for just Marcus and just Thompson separately, in case there was a spelling error in our system, but there's no one by that name. Is it possible? Your husband works for a different accounting firm. Maybe Morrison & Associates is similar to another company name, and there's been confusion." The room started spinning. I reached out and grabbed the edge of the kitchen counter to steady myself, my other hand gripping the phone so tight my knuckles went pale and I could feel my wedding ring digging into my finger. "No," I said, and my voice sounded strange in my own ears, thin and high and scared. "No, he works there. I've called this number hundreds of times over the years. I've been to the office, I've attended the Christmas parties, I've met his co-workers, Tom Chen and Robert Williams and Susan Martinez. I've met your boss, Mr. Morrison himself." I shook his hand at the holiday party 3 years. Ego Janet was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her typing. Then she said, "Ma'am, I don't know what to tell you, but your husband doesn't work here. Mr. Morrison is our founder and CEO. And yes, we have a Tom Chen in our corporate law division and a Susan Martinez in HR. But there's no Robert Williams in our system. And neither Tom nor Susan work in accounting. They wouldn't have worked with your husband if he was an accountant. I'm very sorry, but I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Would you like me to connect you with our Human Resources Department? Maybe they can help you figure out what's going on." I hung up the phone, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it, and I just stood there in my kitchen, staring at the wall, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard, trying to find some rational explanation, some way that this could all be a mistake, but deep down in a place I didn't want to acknowledge, I knew there was no mistake. Janet had been very clear, very certain, and she had no reason to lie to me. A random woman calling on the phone. There had to be an explanation. I told myself, forcing my breathing to slow down, forcing my panic down. Maybe Marcus had changed companies and just forgot to tell me, maybe in all the chaos of daily life, of work and bills and family obligations. He'd mentioned it, and I'd forgotten. Maybe he'd been working from a different office location. Maybe Morrison & Associates had merged with another company and changed their name. Maybe he'd been transferred to a satellite office that kept separate records. But even as I tried to convince myself of these possibilities, even as I grasped for rational explanations, a cold, sick feeling was growing in my stomach, spreading through my body like ice water, because deep down I knew something was very, very wrong, because in 32 years of marriage, Marcus and I talked every day, we had dinner together, most nights we shared our lives. How does a man change jobs and forget to tell his wife? How does that conversation just never come up over the course of 5 years? 5 years, that's what Janet had said. No record for the past 5 years, which meant if she was right, if the database was accurate, then Marcus had left or lost his job at Morrison & Associates 5 years ago, and had never told me, had kept going to work every day, getting dressed in his suit, grabbing his briefcase, kissing me goodbye, and going somewhere else, and I had no idea where. I looked around my kitchen, trying to ground myself in reality, the kitchen where I'd made breakfast that very morning, where Marcus had sat reading the Wall Street Journal like he did every day, with his coffee black 2 sugars and his wheat toast, with butter, where he'd told me about a difficult client he was working with, about some complicated tax situation he was trying to resolve, where he'd kissed me on the cheek and said, "Love, you see you tonight." Just like always, the family photos on. The refrigerator held up by magnets from our various vacations. Myrtle Beach, Charleston, Savannah, the girls' school pictures from kindergarten through high school graduation. Marcus and me on our wedding day. Both of us so young, so full of hope. The calendar on the wall where we marked important dates, appointments, doctor visits, birthday dinners, like the one tonight for Keisha, who was turning 28. The coffee maker Marcus used every single morning, his favorite mug that said Worlds. Best dad that Shanice had given him on Father's Day 10 years ago. Everything looked normal. Everything looked exactly the way it should look in a happy, stable, middle-class home. But if Marcus hadn't been going to work at Morrison and Associates for the past 5 years then, where had he been going every single weekday? From 7:30 in the morning when he left the house until 6 or 6:30, or sometimes 7 at night when he came home. What had he been doing all day? Who had he been with? And most terrifyingly, what else had he been lying about? I felt my legs go weak, and I pulled out one of the kitchen chairs and sat down heavily. My mind racing through the past 5 years, trying to remember if there had been any signs, any clues, anything that should have tipped me off that something was wrong, but everything seemed normal. Marcus came home at the same time. Every night he complained about work, the same way he always had about difficult clients, about long hours, about the pressure of meeting deadlines. He talked about his co-workers by name, Tom and Robert and Susan, the same people he'd been talking about for years. He brought home the same salary, his paychecks were deposited into our joint account, like clockwork every 2 weeks, the same amount they'd always been, maybe even a little more after his supposed promotion. 2 years ago, we filed our taxes together every April, Marcus sitting at the dining room table with all his forms and receipts doing what accountants do. Our financial life seemed completely normal, stable, predictable. We had money in our savings account, our mortgage was being paid, our retirement accounts were growing. Our daughters had graduated from college debt-free because we'd saved and planned and sacrificed everything. Pointed to a man who was employed, who was working, who was doing exactly what he said he was doing. But if he wasn't working at Morrison and Associates, then where was the money coming from? I got up from the table, my legs still shaky, and walked through the house as if seeing it for the first time, as if I was a detective in my own life. Looking for clues, I went upstairs to Marcus's home office, a small room that used to be Keisha's bedroom. Before she moved out, the room where Marcus paid our bills, organized our taxes, kept all his important files. I opened the door and stood in the doorway, looking at his desk, his filing cabinet, his bookshelf full of tax code books and accounting textbooks, his computer, his printer, his bulletin board covered with sticky notes and receipts, and a calendar marked with appointments. Everything looked legitimate. Everything looked like the office of a working accountant. But was any of it real? I walked to his filing cabinet and opened the top drawer. My heart pounding because I'd never gone through Marcus's things before, never felt the need to. In 32 years of marriage, we'd trusted each other. We'd respected each other's privacy, but trust was a luxury I could no longer afford. The filing cabinet was organized with Marcus's typical precision, each folder labeled in his neat handwriting: bank statements, investment accounts, mortgage tax returns, 2019, tax returns, 2020, tax returns, 2021. I pulled out the bank statements folder and started going through the papers. Our joint checking account showed regular deposits twice a month, like clockwork. The amounts matched what I knew Marcus made or what I thought he made as a senior partner. Our savings account showed steady growth. We were putting away money every month, like we'd always done. Our investment accounts, our 401ks, everything looked normal, healthy, stable. Wherever Marcus had been spending his days, whatever he'd been doing, he was still bringing in money. But from where, if not from Morrison and Associates? He sat down at Marcus's desk and turned on his computer, but immediately hit a roadblock. It was password protected, a login screen asking for a password I'd never needed before. Because I'd never had a reason to use Marcus's computer, I tried our anniversary date, 08/12/1991. Nothing. I tried the girls' birthdays, Shanice's first, 03, 2/5/1992, nothing, Keisha 0. 7/18/1995, still nothing. I tried his mother's maiden name, Harrison, nothing. His childhood dog's name, Buddy, nothing. His favorite football team, Lions, nothing. After 10 failed attempts, the computer locked me out, telling me I'd exceeded the maximum number of login attempts and would need to wait 30 minutes before trying again. I sat back in his office chair, my hands trembling, feeling more frustrated and scared with each passing minute. My husband had password, protected his computer, which wasn't unusual. Lots of people do that, but I couldn't guess the password, which meant he'd chosen something I wouldn't know. Something that wasn't tied to our shared life, our shared history. And that felt significant, felt like another small betrayal in what was rapidly becoming a mountain of deception. I looked around his office with new eyes, seeing it not as the familiar workspace of my husband, but as a potential crime scene, a place full of evidence I didn't know how to read. The tax code books on his shelf. Were they real or just props? The papers on his bulletin board, were they legitimate or just part of an elaborate stage set? The calendar on the wall showed appointments written in Marcus's handwriting. Client meeting 2 p.m. conference call with Tom. 10 a.m. review. Peterson account all day, but were any of these things real or were they all just part of the performance? I stood up and started opening desk drawers, going through papers, looking for anything that might tell me what was really going on. The top drawer had the usual office supplies, pens, pencils, staplers, paper clips, sticky notes. The second drawer had more files, paid bills, credit card statements, receipts. I pulled out the credit card statements and started going through them, looking for something unusual, but everything seemed normal. Gas stations, grocery stores, the hardware store, a few restaurants, but nothing suspicious, no hotel charges, no expensive gifts, no evidence of another woman. Because that's where my mind was starting to go. If Marcus wasn't at work, then maybe he was with someone else. Maybe for 5 years, my husband had been having an affair. Maybe he had a whole other life, a whole other family somewhere. And I'd been too trusting, too naive, too comfortable in my marriage to see it. The third drawer was locked, a small drawer at the bottom of the desk with a keyhole and no key. I pulled on it, but it wouldn't budge. Tried to jimmy it open with a letter opener, but the lock held firm, and the fact that it was locked, the fact that Marcus felt the need to lock a drawer in his own home office, in his own house, felt like confirmation that he was hiding something. Because why else would you lock a drawer? Unless there was something inside. You didn't want anyone to see. I went back downstairs, my mind racing, trying to figure out what to do next. I could call Marcus, confront him right now, demand to know what was going on. But something stopped me, because if I called him, if I gave him warning, then he'd have time to prepare, time to come up with a story, time to cover his tracks better, to wait, better to gather more information, better to know exactly what I was dealing with before I confronted him. I picked up my phone and called Shanice, my oldest daughter, who lived in Southfield about 20 minutes away. She was a nurse at Beaumont Hospital working the day shift, and I knew she'd be on her lunch break. Around this time, she answered on the second ring. "Hey, Mama, what's up?" Her voice, cheerful and warm and normal, and I almost started crying right there, because everything in my life had just shifted, had just revealed itself to be a lie. But Shanice didn't know that yet. Shanice still lived in a world where her parents had a normal marriage, where her father went to work every day, where everything was stable and predictable. "Baby," I said, and my voice cracked, despite my best efforts to sound normal. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Okay." There was a pause, and when Shanice spoke again, her voice had changed, become concerned, worried. "Mama, what's wrong? What happened? Have you talked to your father lately?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "About his job? Has he mentioned anything to you about work being different or changing companies or anything like that?" There was a silence on the other end. Then Shanice said slowly, "No. Why would Dad change companies? He's been at Morrison and Associates forever. He's a senior partner. He's worked his way up over 23 years. Why? What's going on? I took a deep breath, trying to figure out how to explain, trying to find words for something that didn't make sense. I called his office today. I said to remind him about Keisha's birthday dinner tonight, and the receptionist told me he doesn't work there. Shanice? She said there's no record of him ever working there. She said, according to their database, he hasn't been employed at Morrison and Associates for the past 5 years. The silence on the other end of the line stretched out so long, I thought we'd been disconnected. Then Shanice said, Mama. That's crazy, that's insane. Dad has worked at Morrison and Associates since before I was born. I've heard him talk about work. My entire life. I've met his co-workers. We've been to the Christmas parties, maybe. You called the wrong number. Maybe you got transferred to the wrong company or something. I called the same number. I always call. I said the number I've been calling for 23 years. The receptionist looked him up in their system. Shanice. She searched the database. She even searched for just his first name and just his last name separately, in case there was a spelling error. He's not there, baby. He hasn't been there for 5 years. Another long silence. Then Shanice said, in a voice that sounded very small, very scared, Then, where has he been going every day? Mama, where has Dad been for the past 5 years? That was the question, wasn't it? That was the question that was tearing me apart, making my hands shake and my heart race and my world crumble. The question I couldn't answer. Where had my husband been going every single day for 5 years when he left the house in his suit with his briefcase pretending to go to a job he didn't have? I don't know, baby, I said. And now I couldn't stop the tears that were running down my face. I don't know, but I'm going to find out. Mama Shanice said, her voice stronger now, more determined. What do you need me to do? You want me to come over? You want me to be there when Dad gets home tonight? I thought about it. Thought about having Shanice there as support, as backup, as a witness. But I didn't want to put my daughter in the middle of whatever this was. Didn't want her to see her father confronted. Didn't want her there if things got ugly. Not yet. I said not right now. I need to figure out what's going on first. I need to gather information, and then I'll confront your father. But Shanice, I need you to do something for me. Anything, Mama. What do you need? Don't tell Keisha. I said not. Yet today is her birthday. She's supposed to come over for dinner tonight, and I don't want to ruin that for her. I don't want her to know anything is wrong until I figure out what's actually happening. Okay, Mama? Okay? Shanice said. But you call me the second you need me. You call me if anything happens, if Dad comes home early, if you find out anything. Promise me you'll call. Of course, baby, I said. I'll call you. I promise. We said our goodbyes, and I hung up the phone feeling even more alone than before, because saying it out loud to Shanice had made it real, had taken this nightmare out of my head and put it into the world where other people knew about it, where it couldn't be taken back or explained away. I walked through my house again, moving from room to room, touching things that belonged to Marcus, his jacket hanging on the coat rack by the door, his shoes lined up neatly in the closet, his reading glasses on the nightstand, his favorite chair in the living room where he sat, every evening, reading the paper or watching the news. All these ordinary objects that belonged to a man I thought I knew. A man I'd been married to for 32 years. A man who apparently had been lying to me for the past 5 years. And if he'd been lying about this, what else had he lied about? I went to our bedroom, the room where we'd slept side by side for 3 decades, where we'd made love and had quiet conversations in the dark, where we'd comforted each other through bad news and celebrated good news, where I'd thought we shared everything. I opened his dresser drawer and started going through his clothes, his socks, his underwear, his undershirts, looking for, I didn't know what exactly, just something, anything that might give me a clue. Nothing. Everything was normal, folded, neatly organized by type and color, the way Marcus always kept things. I moved to his closet and started checking the pockets of his suits. All those expensive suits he wore to his important accounting job, the suits I'd helped him pick out over the years, telling him which ties matched which shirts, which colors looked best on him in the pocket of his gray suit. I found a receipt from a coffee shop dated last Tuesday for 2 coffees and 2 muffins. 2 of everything, which meant he'd been with someone, but who in the pocket of his navy suit I found a business card. But it wasn't from Morrison and Associates, it was from a place called Detroit Community Outreach Center. And underneath the name, it said, Marcus Thompson, Program Coordinator with a phone number and an email address, stood there in our closet holding that business card, feeling like the floor was dropping out from beneath me. Program Coordinator, not accountant, not senior partner. Program Coordinator at a place called Detroit Community Outreach Center. What was that? What did that mean? I went back to Marcus's office, taking the business card with me, and I opened his computer again. The 30 minutes had passed, and I could try logging in again. I tried the name from the business card, Detroit as a password. Nothing. I tried outreach. Nothing. I tried community. Nothing. Then, almost on a whim, I tried the full name, Detroit Community Outreach Center, no spaces, and the computer. Unlocked, and I was in my husband's computer, looking at his desktop, looking at his secret life. I clicked on his email, and there it was. Hundreds of emails to and from people at Detroit Community Outreach Center. Emails about programs and schedules. And veterans in need and funding and donations emails where Marcus signed his name as program coordinator, where people called him Marcus or Thompson or Coach, where he talked about his work with the passion and enthusiasm I hadn't heard from him. In years, I opened his documents folder and found pay stubs, but not from Morrison and Associates, from Detroit Community Outreach Center. And according to these pay stubs, Marcus made $38,000 a year, about 40% less than what I thought he was making as a senior partner at Morrison and Associates. But our bank account showed deposits that matched his supposed accountant's salary, which meant there was money coming from somewhere else. Money I didn't know about. Money Marcus had hidden from May, sat there at his desk staring at the computer screen, trying to process what I was seeing. My husband wasn't an accountant. At least not anymore. He was a program coordinator at some place called Detroit Community Outreach Center, making less than half what I thought he made, and somehow hiding the difference, somehow making up the financial gap in a way that kept our life looking normal and stable and unchanged. I Googled Detroit Community Outreach Center. With shaking hands, and their website came up. It was a nonprofit organization that provided services to homeless veterans, job training, addiction counseling, mental health support, housing, assistance, transitional programs. The website had photos of veterans in various stages of recovery, learning new skills, getting their lives back together, rebuilding after trauma. And there on the staff page was a photo of my husband, Marcus Thompson, program coordinator, smiling in a way I hadn't seen him smile in years, standing with his arm around a veteran, both of them holding certificates, looking proud and happy and fulfilled. The caption under the photo said, Marcus Thompson joined our team 6 years ago and has been instrumental in helping over 200 veterans transition back to civilian life. His dedication, passion, and genuine care for the men and women he serves makes him an invaluable part of our DCOC family. 6 years, he'd been working there for 6 years, not 5 like Janet had said, which meant he'd left Morrison and Associates, gotten this new job, and never told me for 6 years. Every single morning he'd gotten up, put on a suit, grabbed his briefcase, and pretended to go to his accounting job, when really he was going to this nonprofit, working with veterans, doing something completely different from what I thought he was doing. 6 years of lies, 6 years of deception, 6 years of living a double life. And I'd had no idea. I'd been completely oblivious, going about my own life, my own routine, thinking everything was fine, thinking my husband went to work and came home, thinking we had a normal marriage, a normal life, built on honesty and trust and partnership, when really, I'd been living in a fantasy, a carefully constructed illusion that Marcus had maintained for 6 years. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like the walls of my bedroom were closing in on me, like everything I thought I knew about my life, about my marriage, about my husband was a lie, because if he could lie about something this big, this fundamental, what else had he lied about? Did I know him at all? The man I'd been married to for 32 years. The man I'd raised children with. The man I'd built a life with, was he even real? Or was he just a character Marcus had been playing, a role he'd perfected over 3 decades? I printed out everything I could find, the pay stubs from Detroit Community Outreach Center, the emails that showed his real job, his real work, his real life, the photo from the website, the business card, everything. I gathered it all into a folder, creating a file of evidence, like I was building a case, like I was preparing for trial, because in a way I was building a case against my husband, gathering proof of his deception, preparing to confront him with the truth about his lies. I looked at the clock. It was 3:30 in the afternoon. Marcus wouldn't be home until 8. He thought I still believed he was at Morrison and Associates in meetings with clients, doing whatever accountants do. He had no idea I knew the truth, and I had 4.5 hours to decide what I was going to do with that truth. 4.5 hours to figure out how to confront a man who'd been lying to me for 6 years. 4.5 hours to prepare myself for the moment when my marriage would either end or transform into something unrecognizable. I called Keisha, my younger daughter, who was just finishing up her last year of law school at University of Michigan. She was the analytical one, the logical one, the one who approached problems like puzzles to be solved. And right now I needed that. I needed someone who could think clearly, because I couldn't. Mama Keisha said, when she answered, "Hey, I was just about to head out. I'll be there around 6 for dinner. Is that still okay, baby?" I said, and my voice was shaking again, despite my best efforts to control it. "I need to ask you something legal, and I need you to be honest with me." There was a pause. Then Keisha said in her lawyer voice, the one she'd been developing in school, "Of course, Mama. What do you need if someone has been lying to you about their employment for years?" I said, choosing my words carefully, "and you've been making financial decisions based on those lies, thinking they had one job when really they had a different job that paid significantly less, and they've been hiding where the extra money comes from. Is that fraud? Is that illegal?" Keisha was quiet for a long moment, and I could almost hear her thinking, working through the legal implications. Then she said slowly, "It depends on the specifics, but generally, yes, that could be considered fraud. Especially if the person was misleading you about finances, if they were hiding income or assets, if they were making you sign documents like tax returns. Based on false information, that's definitely fraud. And depending on how the money was being hidden, it could even be embezzlement or money laundering." "Mama, what's going on? Why are you asking this?" "It's your father," I said. And then, because I couldn't hold it in anymore, because I needed someone to know, someone to understand, I told her everything. I told her about calling Morrison and Associates, about Janet saying Marcus hadn't worked there for 5 years, about finding the business card, and the pay stubs, about discovering he'd been working at Detroit Community Outreach Center for 6 years, about the lie, about the deception, about the 6 years of pretending to be someone he wasn't. When I finished, there was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. Then Keisha said, and her voice was cold, in a way I'd rarely heard from my usually warm, compassionate daughter, "That son of a bitch. I'm sorry, Mama. I know he's my father and I love him, but that son of a bitch has been lying. To all of us for 6 years, he's been lying about where he works, about what he does, about how much money he makes. He's been making you complicit in whatever financial scheme he's running, because if you've been signing tax returns based on false information, you could be held liable too. This isn't just a betrayal. Mama, this is criminal, this is fraud and identity theft and God knows what else. Depending on where that extra money is coming from, what are you going to do?" I didn't know what I was going to do. I'd been asking myself that question for the past 3 hours, and I still didn't have an answer. Part of me wanted to pack a bag and leave right now before Marcus got home. Leave a note telling him I knew everything, and that he could explain himself to an empty house. Part of me wanted to call the police to report him for fraud, to make sure there was an official record of what he'd done. Part of me wanted to stay and confront him, to demand answers, to look him in the eyes, and ask him how he could do this, how he could lie to me for 6 years. But mostly I just felt numb and shocked and betrayed in a way I'd never felt before. Because this wasn't a one-time mistake. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was 6 years of calculated, deliberate, sustained deception. 6 years of looking me in the eye and lying. 6 years of pretending to be someone he wasn't. 6 years of making me believe in a marriage that apparently didn't exist. I don't know. I said to Keisha, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I can't have dinner tonight, baby. I can't sit at that table with your father and pretend everything is okay. I can't celebrate your birthday knowing what I know. I'm sorry. I know this ruins your day. But I can't. Do it, Mama? It's okay, Keisha said, her voice softening. My birthday doesn't matter right now. What matters is you. What matters is figuring out what Dad has done and why he did it. Do you want me to come home? Do you want me to be there when you confront him? I thought about it. But no, I said, I need to do this alone. I need to hear what he has to say without anyone else there. I need to understand. And then after I know everything, then we can figure out what to do next. Okay, Mama Keisha said. But I'm canceling my plans tonight. I'm staying by my phone. And if you need me, if anything happens, if you want me to come over, you call me immediately. Promise me. I promise. Baby, I said, thank you. We hung up and I sat there in Marcus's office, surrounded by the evidence of his deception, and I started to cry. Not loud, dramatic sobs, but quiet tears that ran down my face and dripped onto the papers in front of me. I cried for the marriage I thought I had. I cried for the 32 years I'd invested in a man who apparently didn't trust me enough to be honest with me. I cried for the future I'd imagined, retirement travel, growing old together. All of it built on the foundation of a lie. After I'd cried myself out, I went to the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea, my mama's remedy for everything. When the world gets overwhelming, sit down, have some tea, and think it through. So I sat at the kitchen table with my tea, and I thought it through. And as I thought, I started to get angry. Not the hot, explosive kind of anger that makes you scream and throw things, but the cold, hard kind, the kind that sits in your chest like a stone and makes you very clear about what needs to happen next. Marcus had lied to me for 6 years. That was unforgivable. That was unacceptable. That was a betrayal so deep, so fundamental that I didn't know if our marriage could survive it. But before I could decide whether to try to save our marriage or end it, I needed to understand why. I needed to know the whole story, the real story, not just the pieces I'd discovered on my own. I needed to hear Marcus explain in his own words why he'd done this, why he'd felt the need to lie for 6 years, why he'd built this elaborate deception, why he'd risked everything, our marriage, our family, our future, for a job at a nonprofit working with veterans. And I needed to know where the money was coming from, because the math didn't add up if Marcus was making $38,000 a year at Detroit Community Outreach Center, but our bank account showed deposits that matched a senior partner's salary at an accounting firm. Then there was a $40,000 or $50,000 gap somewhere. Money that was coming from somewhere. Money Marcus had hidden from. May went back to his office and started going through his files more carefully. This time looking for bank statements, for accounts I didn't know about, for investment records, for anything that might show where the money was coming from. I went through every file in his filing cabinet, every folder, every piece of paper, and finally in the back of the bottom drawer, hidden under a stack of old insurance policies, I found what I was looking for. A bank statement for an account I'd never seen before. An account at a different bank from the one we usually used, an account with only Marcus's name on it, not both of ours. An account that had a balance of $97,000. The statements went back 10 years and showed regular deposits. And withdrawals, deposits that looked like they came from some kind of investment or inheritance. And withdrawals that matched the difference between what Marcus actually made at his nonprofit job and what he'd been depositing into our joint account, to maintain the illusion that he was still working as an accountant. My hands were shaking as I looked at these statements, trying to understand what I was seeing. Marcus had a secret bank account with almost $100,000 in it. Money. I'd never known about money that apparently came from somewhere 10 years ago, and that he'd been using to supplement his income to maintain our lifestyle, to keep up the lie for 6 years, and I'd had no idea I'd been signing tax returns every April sitting right next to Marcus as he did our taxes, never knowing that there was an entire bank account, an entire financial life that I wasn't part of. I wanted to call someone. Wanted to talk to Shanice or Keisha again. Wanted to hear another voice tell me this was real, that I wasn't losing my mind, but I didn't. I just sat there in Marcus's office, holding these bank statements, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. Because the person I would normally talk to about something like this, the person I'd always turn to when I was confused or scared or overwhelmed, was Marcus. And Marcus was the one who'd done this to me. Marcus was the one who'd lied. Marcus was the one I couldn't trust. I looked at the clock again. It was 6:30 now. Marcus would be home in an hour and a half. I still had time. Time to calm down. Time to plan what I was going to say. Time to decide how I wanted to handle this confrontation, because it was going to be a confrontation. There was no way around that. No way to have a gentle conversation about this. No way to ease into the topic of, "Hey, honey, I discovered you've been lying to me for 6 years about where you work, and you have a secret bank account with almost $100,000 in it. Care to explain?" This was going to be ugly. This was going to be painful. This was going to potentially end our marriage, and I needed to be ready. For that, I gathered all the evidence I'd found. The pay stubs from Detroit Community Outreach Center, the business card, the printouts from his computer, the bank statements from the secret account, the photo from the website showing Marcus with the veteran. Everything. I organized it all into neat piles on the kitchen table, creating a visual representation of his lies, creating something concrete he couldn't deny or talk his way out of. Then I called Keisha again, and I told her about the secret. Bank account told her about the $97,000 that Marcus had been hiding, Mama Keisha said, and now she sounded really worried. Now she sounded scared. You need to protect yourself legally. You need to take photos of all those documents. You need to send copies to yourself and to me. You need to create a paper trail, because if this goes bad, if Dad has been doing something illegal, you need to be able to prove you didn't know about it. You need to be able to show you were a victim. Here, not an accomplice. So I did what she said. I took photos of every document, every bank statement, every pay stub, every piece of evidence, and I emailed them to myself and to both my daughters, creating a record that existed outside of Marcus's. Control outside of our house, where he couldn't destroy it or hide it or deny it existed. Then I sat down at the kitchen table to wait. Marcus came home at exactly 8:07. Just 7 minutes later than he'd said he would be. I heard his car pull into the driveway, heard the engine shut off, heard his car door slam, heard his key in the front door lock, heard him call out like he did every single night. "Honey, I'm home," the words so normal, so ordinary, so much a part of our routine that hearing them now after everything I'd discovered felt surreal. Felt like watching an actor in a play pretending to be a husband, pretending to have a normal marriage, pretending everything was fine. I was sitting at the kitchen table with all the evidence spread out in front of me, and I didn't answer, didn't call back, didn't get up to greet him like I usually did. I just sat there waiting, listening to his footsteps coming down the hallway, listening to him humming something under his breath, like he always did when he was in a good mood. Listening to him stop in the kitchen doorway when he saw me sitting there, saw the papers spread across the table, saw the look on my face. "Gloria," he said, and I could hear the confusion in his voice. "What's all this? What are you doing?" I looked up at him. This man I'd been married to for 32 years, this man who'd given me 2 beautiful daughters, this man who I'd trusted with my life, my future, my heart. And I said in a voice that sounded calm and cold, and nothing like my own, "Why don't you tell me? Marcus, why don't you tell me about your day at Morrison and Associates? How was work? How were Tom and Robert and Susan? How was that client meeting? You mentioned this morning, the one you said might run late." The color drained from his face slowly, like someone had opened a tap and all the blood was draining out of him. He stood there frozen in the doorway, still holding his briefcase, still wearing his suit and tie, looking at me, then at the papers on the table then back at me, and I watched him realize. I watched the moment it clicked in his mind that I knew. I watched 32 years of marriage hang in the balance. Gloria. He said again, and his voice cracked. He set his briefcase down slowly, carefully, like he was moving through water. What is all this? I gestured to the papers on the table. These are pay stubs. Marcus, pay stubs from a place called Detroit Community Outreach Center. Pay stubs that say you're a program coordinator, not an accountant. Pay stubs that show you make $38,000 a year, not the $90,000 you've been depositing into our account. These are bank statements for an account I never knew existed. An account with your name, only an account with $97,000 in it. An account you've been using to hide the fact that you don't work where I think you work. This is a business card with your name on it from Detroit Community Outreach Center. This is a printout from their website with your photo on it, with a caption that says you've been working there for 6 years. 6 years, Marcus. Not 5, not 4, 6 years of lying to me every single day. Marcus just stood there staring at the table, his face gray, his hands shaking slightly, and the silence stretched out between us, heavy and thick and suffocating, until finally he moved. He walked slowly to the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down heavily, like his legs wouldn't hold him up anymore. He put his head in his hands, and for a long moment he didn't say anything, just sat there breathing hard like he'd been running. I called your office today, I said, my voice still cold, still controlled. I called Morrison and Associates to remind you about Keisha's birthday dinner tonight. And you know what? The receptionist told me, there's no Marcus Thompson working there. She told me according to their records, you haven't worked there for 5 years. She searched the database, Marcus. She searched for your name and you weren't there. So I started looking and I found all of this. I found your real job, your real life. The life you've been hiding from me for 6 years. Marcus finally looked up at me and there were tears in his eyes. Tears I'd rarely seen in 3 decades of marriage, because Marcus wasn't a crier, wasn't a man who showed emotion easily. Gloria, I can explain. He said, his voice barely above a whisper. I swear I can explain. Sit down. Then I said, even though he was already sitting, sit down and tell me everything. And Marcus, don't you dare lie to me. Don't you dare try to minimize this or make excuses or tell me half-truths, because so help me God, if you lie to me one more time, if you try to deceive me one more time, I will walk out that door right now, and you will never see me again. I will take my things, and I will leave, and you can explain to our daughters why their mother left you on one of their birthdays. Do you understand me? He nodded rapidly. Yes, I understand. I won't lie, Gloria. I swear I'll tell you everything. Just please, sit down and listen. I sat down across from him at the kitchen table, where we'd eaten thousands of meals together, where we'd helped our daughters with homework, where we'd paid bills and made plans and talked about our days, where we'd lived our life together, our apparently fictional life. And I waited for him to explain how he'd destroyed everything we'd built. Marcus took a deep breath, wiped his eyes, and began to talk. I quit Morrison and Associates 6 years ago. He said, I didn't get fired. I didn't lose my job. I chose to leave. I walked into Mr. Morrison's office one day, and I gave my 2 weeks' notice, and I left. Why? I asked, my voice sharp. Why would you leave a job you'd worked at for 23 years? A job where you just made senior partner, a job with good pay and benefits and security. Why would you throw all that away? Because I couldn't do it anymore, he said. And now, the words were coming faster, like a dam had broken, because I was miserable. Gloria, absolutely, completely miserable. I'd been miserable for years, maybe even decades, but I kept telling myself it was just part of being an adult, part of having responsibilities, part of providing for my family, but it was killing me slowly every day, sitting in that office, shuffling papers, dealing with rich people's tax problems, helping corporations find loopholes to pay less money. It felt meaningless. It felt empty. I felt like I was wasting my life and I couldn't do it anymore. I just couldn't. So, what I said, you just decided to quit. You just decided to throw away 23 years and not tell me, not discuss it with me, not let me be part of that decision. He looked down at his hands clasped on the table. I know I should have told you. I know we should have talked about it together, but I was ashamed, Gloria. I was so ashamed of what I demanded, ashamed that after 23 years, I couldn't handle it anymore. Ashamed that I was giving up a good job with good pay when so many people would kill for that opportunity. Ashamed that I wanted something different, something that didn't fit the plan we'd made all those years ago when we first got married. You remember that plan? Work hard, save money, provide for our family, retire comfortably. I'd been following that plan for 3 decades, and I realized I couldn't do it for one more day. I needed something else, something that mattered. But I knew if I told you you'd talk me out of it, you'd tell me we couldn't afford. You'd tell me to stick it out just a few more years until retirement. You'd be practical and responsible and right, and I couldn't bear to hear that. So I just didn't tell you. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying, trying to understand how a person makes a decision like that. So instead of being honest with me, instead of trusting me to understand you, decided to lie for 6 years, you decided to get a new job and pretend you still had the old one. You decided to use secret money. To make up the financial difference, you decided to make me complicit in your deception by having me sign tax returns based on false information. Do you understand what you've done? Marcus, do you understand that what you did is fraud? It's illegal, and I could be held liable too, because I signed those returns, Keisha said. So I could go to prison, because you decided to follow your dreams without telling me. His face went even more pale. I didn't think about that, he whispered. I didn't think about the legal ramifications. I was so focused on trying to keep everything looking normal, trying to maintain our lifestyle, trying to make sure you and the girls didn't have to sacrifice anything. I didn't think about how it could affect you, legally. Gloria, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Then tell me about the money, I said. Where did that $97,000 come from? Where have you been getting the money to supplement your income? Marcus sighed and looked even more defeated. My father, he said, when he passed away 10 years ago, he left me some money. It was in his will, a specific bequest just to me, not to both of us. It was about $120,000. And I put it in a separate account. I didn't tell you about it. I had just been slapped across the face. Your father left you money, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Your father died 10 years ago and left you over $100,000, and you never told me we've been married for 32 years. Marcus, 32 years. We're supposed to share everything. We're supposed to be partners. We're supposed to tell each other when major financial things happen, and you got a $100,000 inheritance, and just decided to keep it secret. I know, he said, looking miserable. I know it was wrong, but at the time I told myself I was saving it for an emergency. I told myself it was a cushion in case something went wrong. I told myself you didn't need to know because it wasn't our money. It was just my money from my father, but really, I think even then, even 10 years ago, I was planning this. I was planning my escape from Morrison and Associates. I was planning to do something different with my life, and I knew I'd need money to make the transition, so I kept it secret. So you've been planning this for 10 years, I said, feeling a new wave of betrayal wash over me. For 10 years. You've been keeping secrets for 10 years. You've been hiding money from me, not 6 years. 10. No, Marcus said quickly. Not like that. I mean, yes, I kept the money secret, but I didn't decide to leave Morrison and Associates until 6 years ago. I didn't have a plan. I just had this vague sense that someday I might want to do something different, but I didn't know what. And then I started volunteering. Tell me about the volunteering, I said, because clearly there's more to this story. Clearly you didn't just wake up one day and decide to work with homeless veterans. Marcus nodded. It started about 7 years ago. He said I was feeling really low, really depressed about my work, about my life, and my doctor suggested I try volunteering, try doing something for others as a way to find meaning. So I started volunteering one Saturday, a month at this place, Detroit Community Outreach Center, helping veterans file their taxes, do their paperwork, things like that, accounting stuff, but in a different context, helping people who actually needed help. And Gloria, it changed my life. These men, these veterans, they'd served our country, they'd sacrificed everything, and they came home to nothing, no jobs, no homes, no support, no one who cared. They were living on the streets, addicted, broken, and I could help them. I could actually make a difference in their lives. I could use my skills for something that mattered, and it felt amazing. It felt like I'd finally found my purpose. So you fell in love with the work. I said, yes. He said simply, yes. I did. I started volunteering more and more. Every Saturday, then some weekday evenings, then full weekends, and the director of the center, she saw how passionate I was, how good I was with the veterans, and she offered me a job, a full-time job as a program coordinator, helping to run their employment, training program, their housing assistance program, their counseling services. It was everything I'd been looking for, meaningful work, work that helped people work, that mattered, but the pay was terrible. Gloria, $38,000 a year. Less than half what I was making at Morrison & Associates, and I knew we couldn't live on that. I knew we'd have to make major changes to our lifestyle. We'd have to sell the house maybe, or stop helping the girls with their expenses, or give up our savings plan. And I couldn't bear to ask you to do. That couldn't bear to ask you to sacrifice because of my midlife crisis or whatever this was. So I decided to do both, to work at the center, but supplement my income with my father's money. So our life could stay the same, so you wouldn't have to know, so you wouldn't have to worry, and it worked. Gloria, it actually worked for 6 years. I managed to maintain both lives to keep you believing I was still at Morrison & Associates while I was actually doing this work. I loved this meaningful, fulfilling work, and no one got hurt. No one had to sacrifice. Everyone was happy until today. Until you found out. I sat there looking at him, this man I'd spent more than half my life with, and I realized I didn't know him at all. I didn't know he was capable of this level of deception. Didn't know he could look me in the eye every single day and lie. Didn't know he could make such a massive life decision without including me. Didn't know. He saw our marriage as something where he made choices, and I just lived with the consequences. No one got hurt. I repeated his words back to him slowly. You think no one got hurt, Marcus? Yes. He said, looking confused. I mean, I know you're hurt now, because you found out. But before today, you didn't know you were happy. Our life was good. The girls were fine. I was doing work. I loved everyone was happy. No one was hurt. Do you have any idea? I said. And now I was standing up. Now, the cold control was cracking, and the anger was coming through. Do you have any idea how insulting that is? Do you have any idea how condescending it is for you to sit there and tell me that no one got hurt when you've been lying to me for 6 years, when you've been treating me like a child who can't handle the truth, like someone who needs to be protected from reality, like someone who doesn't deserve to be a partner in her own marriage? I got hurt. Marcus, from the moment you decided to lie to me, I got hurt. You took away my agency. You took away my ability to make informed decisions about my own life. You made me live in a fantasy world where everything seemed fine, when really, our entire life was built on deception. Marcus stood up too, now looking, panicked. Gloria, please, I'm sorry. I know I messed up. I know I should have told you, but I was trying to protect you. I was trying to make sure you didn't have to worry. I was trying, protect me, I said, my voice rising. Protect me from what? From the truth, from reality, from being an actual partner in my own marriage. Marcus, I don't need you to protect me. I need you to be honest with me. I need you to respect me enough to include me in major life decisions. I need you to trust me to handle difficult, Information. You want to know what hurts the most. What hurts the most isn't even the lying, although that's devastating. What hurts the most is that you didn't think I'd understand. You didn't think I'd support you. You didn't trust me enough to tell me you were unhappy at work, that you wanted to do something different, that you needed to find meaning in your life. You made that decision on your own, and then you spent 6 years lying to me about it, and that tells me you don't see me as a partner. You see me as an obstacle, someone to work around, someone to deceive, someone to manage, and I can't be married to someone who sees me that way. I won't be. Gloria, please, Marcus said, and now he was crying openly, tears running down his face. Please don't say that. Please don't give up on us. I made a terrible mistake. I see that now. I should have told you from the beginning. I should have trusted you. I should have been honest, but I was scared and ashamed, and I handled it in the worst possible way. But Gloria, I love you. I've always loved you, everything I did, even the lying I did, because I didn't want to disappoint you. I didn't want to let you down. I didn't want to be the husband who couldn't provide, who gave up a good job for some idealistic dream. I wanted to be the man you thought I was, the stable provider, the good husband, the responsible father, and I didn't know how to be that man and also be true to myself, so I tried to be both, and I know now that was wrong. I know now I should have just been honest, but I can't change the past. Gloria, all I can do is promise you that from this moment forward, I will never lie to you again. I will be completely transparent. I will include you in every decision. I will earn back your trust, however long that takes. Please, just please don't give up on us. Don't give up on 32 years of marriage because of this one terrible mistake. Mistake, I said, and I felt the hysteria bubbling up in my chest. One mistake. Marcus, this wasn't one mistake. This was thousands of mistakes. This was a mistake every single morning when you got dressed and pretended to go to Morrison and Associates. This was a mistake every single evening when you came home and told me about your fake day at your fake job. This was a mistake every single time I asked you about work and you made up stories about clients and meetings and coworkers. This was a mistake every single time we sat down to do our taxes and you had me sign returns based on false information. This was a mistake. Every single time we made plans for retirement based on income you didn't actually have. This wasn't one mistake. Marcus, this was 6 years of continuous, deliberate, calculated deception. And I don't know if I can forgive that. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. I walked away from the table, walked to the kitchen window, and stared out at our backyard, at the life we'd built together, the swing set we'd put up when the girls were little, even though it was rusted and empty. Now the garden I'd planted every spring, the fence Marcus had built the year after we moved in, all these pieces of our shared life, our shared history. And I wondered if any of it was real, if any of what I thought we had was actually true. I heard Marcus move behind me, heard him walk over to stand beside me, but not too close, giving me space. Gloria, he said quietly. What can I do to fix this? I don't know if you can fix this. I said, still staring out the window. I don't know if this is fixable, Marcus. You've broken something fundamental. You've broken trust and partnership and honesty, the foundation of our marriage, and I don't know if we can rebuild that. I don't even know if I want to try, because trying means more years of work, more years of counseling, more years of slowly learning to trust you again. And I'm 56 years old, Marcus. I'm too old to spend the rest of my life wondering if you're lying to me, wondering if there are more secrets, wondering if the man I see is the real you or just another performance. Then what are you saying? He asked, and I could hear the fear in his voice. Are you saying you want a divorce? I don't know. I said, honestly, I don't know what I want right now, except space. I need space. Marcus, I need time to think, to process, to figure out what I'm feeling and what I want for my future. Our future, maybe. I can't do that with you here. I can't think clearly when you're in the house, reminding me of everything we had. everything I thought we had. So I think you need to leave, what he said. No, Gloria. Please no. Where would I even go? A hotel? I said. Or Shanice's house. She has a spare room, or maybe your girlfriend's house. Wait, what? No, Gloria, there's no girlfriend. I swear to God, there's no other woman. This isn't about an affair. This is exactly what I told you. It's about the job, about finding meaningful work. There's no one else, I promise. I turned to look at him. Really, look at him studying his face, looking for signs of more lies, and I believed him. I could see it in his eyes, hear it in his voice, feel it in the way he was looking at me, like I was his whole world. Like the thought of losing me was unbearable, and somehow that made it worse. Because if there had been another woman, I could have understood that I could have fit that into a narrative that made sense. Husband has affair, lies too. Covered up. Classic story, predictable outcome. But this was so much stranger, so much more complicated. Marcus hadn't lied to be with another woman. He'd lied to find meaning in his work. He'd lied to help homeless veterans. He'd built an elaborate, 6-year deception, not to hurt me but to protect me. Or so he thought, and I didn't know how to process that, didn't know how to be angry at someone whose intentions were good, even if their actions were terrible. I still need you to leave, I said, my voice softer now, but still firm. I still need time and space, and I can't have that with you here. So please pack a bag, take whatever you need, and go stay somewhere else for a while. And Marcus, while you're gone, I want you to think about what you really want, because clearly what you wanted for the past 6 years wasn't the life we had together. Clearly, you wanted something different, and instead of being honest about that, you created this elaborate lie so you could have both. And that's not fair. That's not a partnership. That's you making unilateral decisions and expecting me to just go along with it once you figure out the consequences. So think about what you really want and be honest about it for once. Be honest with yourself and with me. Marcus stood there for a long moment just looking at me with tears still running down his face. Then finally he nodded. Okay? He said, his voice broken. Okay, I'll go. I'll give you space. I'll think about everything you said. And Gloria, I am sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything. I know sorry is inadequate. But I am truly, deeply sorry for what I've done, for the pain I've caused, for the trust I've broken. I love you, and I will do whatever it takes to earn your forgiveness, to rebuild what I've destroyed, however long that takes. He walked slowly toward the stairs to go pack his things, and I stood there in the kitchen listening to his footsteps. Overhead, listening to drawers opening and closing, listening to the sounds of my husband packing to leave, and I felt strangely empty, not angry anymore, not sad, just empty, like something had been hollowed out of me about 20 minutes later. Marcus came back downstairs carrying a duffel bag and his laptop case. He stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at me one more time. I'll call you tomorrow. He said, if that's okay, if you're ready to talk. Not tomorrow, I said. I need at least a few days, maybe a week. I'll call you when I'm ready. Okay? He said, okay, I'll wait to hear from you. And Gloria, yeah, I am so sorry. I know, I said. Now please just go. He nodded once more, then turned and walked to the front door. I heard it open, heard his footsteps on the porch, heard the door close behind him, heard his car start in the driveway, heard him drive away. And then the house was silent, completely silent, in a way it hadn't been in 32 years. And I stood there in that silence, and finally I let myself cry, really cry. Not the quiet tears from earlier, but loud, gasping sobs that came from deep in my chest. I cried for my marriage. I cried for the 32 years I'd invested in a man who didn't trust me enough to be honest. I cried for the future I'd imagined that now seemed uncertain. I cried for the version of myself who'd woken up that morning thinking she had a normal, happy, stable life. I cried for the loss of that innocence, that trust, that comfortable certainty. I cried until I had no tears left, and then I called Shanice. Mama, she answered immediately. What happened? Where's Dad? He's gone, I said, my voice hoarse from crying. I told him to leave, I told him to pack a bag and go, and he did. Oh, Mama. Shanice said, I'm so sorry. Do you want me to come over? Yes, I said, yes, please. I don't want to be alone tonight. Okay, she said. I'm leaving right now. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Do you need me to bring anything, just yourself? I said. Just bring yourself and Shanice. Yes, Mama. Can you call your sister? Tell her what happened. Tell her I'm sorry, her birthday dinner got ruined. But I couldn't. Of course. Mama Shanice said, I'll call her right now. We love you, Mama. We're here for whatever you need. I know, baby. I said, I love you too. We hung up and I walked through my house, turning on lights in every room because somehow the darkness felt oppressive, felt like it was closing in on me. And I needed light, needed to push back against the shadows. I went to Marcus's office and looked at all the evidence still scattered. Across his desk, all the proof of his deception. And I wondered what I was going to do with it all. Wondered if I needed to keep it for legal purposes, or if I should just throw it away. Try to pretend none of this had ever happened, but I couldn't. Couldn't just sweep this under the rug and move on. This was too big, too fundamental, too life-changing. I sat down at his desk one more time, and I opened his computer, which was still logged in, and I started reading through his emails. Not to find more evidence of deception, but to understand, to see what his life had really been like for the past 6 years. To know the man he'd become when he wasn't pretending to be the man I thought he was. And what I found surprised me. The emails weren't cold or corporate or calculating. They were warm and passionate and full of genuine care for the veterans he was helping. There were emails from men thanking Marcus for saving their lives, for helping them find housing, for getting them into rehab, for reconnecting them with their families. There were emails from Marcus advocating for his clients, fighting for resources, arguing with bureaucracies that didn't want to help. There were emails showing late nights and early mornings and weekends, spent working, not for money, but because he genuinely cared. And I realized something. Sitting there reading those emails, Marcus hadn't been lying about everything. He hadn't been pretending to care about this work. He really did. Love it really did. Find meaning in it. Really had found his purpose. And in a twisted way, he really had been trying to protect me, trying to let me keep the life we'd built while he quietly found fulfillment elsewhere. It was still wrong. It was still betrayal. It was still unforgivable in many ways, but it wasn't malicious. It wasn't cruel. It was just deeply, deeply misguided. Shanice arrived. About 20 minutes later, she let herself in with her key and found me still sitting at Marcus's desk, staring at his computer. "Screen Mama," she said softly, and I turned to look at her, my beautiful oldest daughter who looked so much like me when I was her age, and I started crying again. She crossed the room in 3 strides and wrapped her arms around me and held me while I cried into her shoulder like I used to hold her when she was little and had bad dreams. "It's going to be okay, Mama," she murmured, stroking my hair. "You're going to be okay. We're all going to be okay." We went downstairs and sat on the couch, and I told her everything, told her about the confrontation, about Marcus's explanation, about his reasons for lying about the money from his father, about the 6 years of deception, about asking him to leave. Shanice listened to all of it, holding my hand. And when I was done, she said, "Mama, I need to tell you something, and you might not want to hear it, but I think you need to." "What is it?" I asked. "Part of me understands why Dad did what he did," she said quickly before I could interrupt. "Not the lying. That was wrong. And you have every right to be furious about that. But the wanting to do meaningful work, the wanting to help people, the not knowing how to tell you he was unhappy. I get that, because Mama, and please don't take this the wrong way, but you can be pretty rigid about things like money and security and planning for the future. I watched you my whole childhood working so hard to make sure we had everything we needed, sacrificing so much. And I know Dad watched that too, and I think maybe he felt like he couldn't tell you he wanted to give up a good-paying job for something that paid less. because he knew you'd see it as irresponsible as throwing away security, as being selfish. And maybe he was right. Maybe you would have talked him out of it. Maybe you would have made him stay at a job that was making him miserable because it was practical. I stared at my daughter, feeling defensive, feeling attacked. Are you saying this is my fault? Are you saying I drove your father to lie? To me, no. Mama Shanice said firmly, squeezing my hand. No, the lying was his choice and his responsibility. I'm just saying maybe Dad felt trapped. Felt like he couldn't be honest with you because of how you might react, and that doesn't excuse the lying, but maybe it explains it a little bit. And maybe going forward, if you decide to try to work this out with him, maybe you need to think about whether you created an environment where he felt like he could tell you hard truths, or whether he felt like he had to be someone he wasn't, in order to keep you happy. I pulled my hand away from hers, feeling hurt, feeling misunderstood. So now I'm the bad guy. Now I'm the one who needs to change, even though I'm not the one who lied for 6 years. No, Mama, you're not the bad guy, Shanice said gently. But relationships are complicated, and usually when something like this happens, both people have contributed to the dynamic, even if one person's actions are way worse than the other's. Dad lied. That's terrible. That's unforgivable. But maybe you need to ask yourself why he felt like he couldn't be honest. What was it about your relationship, your communication patterns, your expectations that made him feel like lying was his only option? Didn't want to hear this. Didn't want to consider that maybe I had played some role in this disaster. But as I sat there with my daughter's words hanging in the air, I couldn't help but think back over the years. Think about the times Marcus had tried to talk to me about being unfulfilled at work, and I'd told him everyone feels that way. Sometimes you just have to push through. Think about the times he'd mentioned wanting to volunteer more, wanting to do something meaningful, and I'd said, "That's nice, honey, but don't forget, we have bills to pay." Think about the times I'd made comments about the neighbors who'd taken a pay cut to switch careers, how irresponsible that was, how they'd probably regret it when they couldn't retire comfortably. I'd thought I was being practical, being responsible, being the stable one, but had I been so rigid, so focused on security and planning, that I'd made Marcus feel like he couldn't tell me the truth, like he had to lie to live the life he wanted maybe. Shanice was right. Maybe I hadn't driven Marcus to lie, but maybe I'd created an environment where he felt like lying was his only option, and that was something I needed to examine, something I needed to take responsibility for, even as I held him. Accountable for his choices, we sat there on the couch for a long time. Shanice and I talking through everything, processing the shock and pain and confusion of the day, and eventually Keisha came over too. She'd driven from Ann Arbor as soon as Shanice called her, canceling her birthday plans to be with me, and having both my daughters there, both my girls surrounding me with love and support, made the pain a little more bearable, made the future seem a little less terrifying around midnight. Shanice and Keisha convinced me to go to bed, to try to get some sleep, even though I protested that I wouldn't be able to. They tucked me in, like I used to tuck them in when they were little, and they promised they'd be downstairs if I needed anything, and somehow, despite everything, despite the worst day of my life, I fell asleep exhausted by emotion, drained by tears, grateful for my daughters, grateful that at least some part of my family was still solid, still, real, still there. I woke up the next morning to sunlight streaming through my bedroom window, and for just a moment, everything was normal. Just another Thursday morning, then reality crashed back over me like a wave. Marcus was gone. Our marriage was in shambles. My entire life had been revealed as a carefully constructed lie, and I had to figure out what to do next. I got up, showered, dressed, and went downstairs, where I found both my daughters in the kitchen. Shanice was making coffee, and Keisha was making scrambled eggs and toast. And the normalcy of it, the simple act of my daughters taking care of me, made me want to cry all over again. But I was tired of crying, tired of feeling sorry for myself. So instead, I sat down at the kitchen table, and I said, "Okay, I need to make a plan. I need to figure out what happens next, and both my daughters sat down with me and we started making a list of things that needed to happen. First, I needed to protect myself financially. Keisha said I needed to go to the bank and make sure all our accounts were secure. Make sure Marcus couldn't drain them while we were separated. I needed to get copies of all our financial records, all. Our tax returns, all our investment statements, everything I needed to document the secret bank account and the money from his father's inheritance. I needed to consult with a lawyer, not necessarily to file for divorce yet, but to understand my options, to know what my rights were. Second, I needed to talk to Marcus, but not right away, not until I'd had time to process everything that had happened. Shanice said I needed to give myself at least a week, maybe 2, before I tried to have a real conversation with him, because right now I was too angry, too hurt, too raw to think clearly about what I wanted for the future. Third, I needed to take care of myself. Keisha said I needed to eat even when I didn't feel hungry. I needed to sleep even when my mind was racing. I needed to talk to friends or a therapist or someone who could help me process this trauma. Because yes, it was trauma. Yes, having your entire reality shattered counts as a traumatic event. And I needed to treat it that way. Needed to be gentle with myself, needed to not rush the healing process. And fourth, I needed to figure out what I wanted. Not what Marcus wanted. Not what my daughters wanted. Not what society expected, but what I truly wanted for my future. Did I want to try to save my marriage? Did I want to rebuild trust with a man who'd lied to me for 6 years? Did I want to forgive him and move forward? Or did I want to start over? Did I want a divorce? Did I want to build a new life as a single woman in my 50s? Did I want to take all the pain and anger and betrayal and transform it into something new? Something that was entirely mine. And I didn't know the answer to that question. Didn't know if I'd know the answer next week or next month or even next year. But I knew I needed to give myself permission to not know. Permission to take my time. Permission to figure it out as I went along without pressure from Marcus or anyone else over. The next week I did everything on the list. I went to the bank and met with our financial advisor and learned that all our accounts were in both our names, which meant Marcus could access them, but also meant I could access them. I made copies of everything. I met with a lawyer, a sharp woman in her 60s named Patricia, who specialized in divorce and family law, and she told me I had options. She told me that if I decided to file for divorce, I could cite fraud and deception as grounds. She told me I could probably get a favorable settlement given Marcus's actions. But she also told me I didn't have to decide. Right away, I could take my time, could separate from Marcus without divorcing him, could see if counseling and time could heal what had been broken, or I could file immediately, could end the marriage cleanly, and move forward with my life. And the choice was entirely mine. I talked to my friends, the women from church who I'd known for decades, who'd been through their own marriage struggles, their own betrayals, their own moments of having to decide whether to stay or go, and they were supportive and kind, but also honest. Some of them told me to leave, told me that a man who could lie for 6 years would lie, again told me I deserved better, deserved someone who respected me enough to be honest. Others told me to stay, told me that 32 years of marriage was worth fighting for, told me that everyone makes mistakes, even big ones, and that forgiveness was possible, that healing was possible if both people were willing to do the work. And I appreciated both perspectives, appreciated hearing from women who'd made different choices and found happiness either way, because it reminded me that there was no right answer, no perfect solution, just whatever choice felt right for me. Marcus called me every day that week, leaving voicemails because I wasn't ready to talk, yet leaving messages that started out apologetic and desperate and gradually became more thoughtful, more introspective. He told me he was staying at a hotel. He told me he'd quit his job at Detroit Community Outreach Center because he realized he couldn't rebuild trust while still working at the place he'd lied about. He told me he'd started seeing a therapist to work through his issues with honesty and communication. He told me he'd told our daughters everything, had sat down with both of them separately and explained the whole story and apologized for lying to them too. He told me he loved me. He told me he was sorry. He told me he'd wait as long as it took for me to be ready to talk, and hearing his voice on those messages was both comforting and painful. Comforting because after 32 years, his voice was still home, was still familiar. Still the sound I associated with safety and love. Painful because every time I heard it, I remembered the lies, remembered the betrayal, remembered that the man who owned that voice had deceived me for 6 years, and I didn't know if I could ever trust him again. Finally, after 10 days of silence, I called him back. "We need to talk," I said, when he answered, and I could hear the relief in his voice. "Yes," he said. "Yes. Thank you, Gloria. Thank you for calling. I've missed you so much. I miss you too," I admitted, because it was true. Despite everything, despite the anger and hurt and betrayal, I did miss him. Missed having him in the house, missed our routines, missed the comfortable companionship we'd built over 3 decades. But missing someone and trusting them are 2 different things we need to meet. I said somewhere neutral. Not the house, not yet. How about that coffee shop on Woodward, the one we used to go to when we were dating? Perfect. He said, "When tomorrow?" I said 1 o'clock, okay? He said, his voice eager. "I'll be there." Gloria? "Yes, thank you. Thank you for giving me a chance to—" "We'll see." I interrupted. "We'll see what happens. This isn't me forgiving you. This is just me being willing to listen. I understand," he said. "I understand." The next day I arrived at the coffee shop, 15 minutes early, wanting to get there first, wanting to have control over at least that small thing. I ordered a latte and sat at a table in the corner, and I watched the door. And when Marcus walked in at exactly 1 o'clock, looking nervous and hopeful and terrified all at once, I felt my heart do this complicated thing where it simultaneously reached for him and pulled back from him. He looked different, somehow older, maybe, or just more real, more like an actual person and less like the character he'd been playing. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, not his usual suit, and his hair was a little longer, a little grayer than I remembered, and he had dark circles under his eyes, like he hadn't been sleeping well. He saw me, and his whole face lit up, and he walked over to the table, and for a moment I thought he might try to hug me, but he seemed to think better of it, and just sat down across from me instead, keeping a respectful distance between us. "Hi, Gloria," he said softly. "Hi, Marcus," I replied. We sat there in silence for a moment, just looking at each other, and I could see that he'd been crying, could see the toll the past week and a half had taken on him, and part of me felt sorry for him, but a bigger part of me remembered that he'd done this to himself, that he'd made the choices that led us here, that my sympathy wasn't what he needed right now. What he needed was accountability. "Thank you for meeting me," he said. "Finally, I know you didn't have to. I know you could have just filed for divorce and never spoken to me again. So thank you for giving me a chance to explain further, to answer your questions, to try to make this right. If that's even possible. I have a lot of questions," I said, taking a sip of my coffee. "But before we get into all of that, I need to know one thing, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Are there any other secrets, Marcus? Any other lies? Any other things you've been hiding from me for years? Because if there are, you need to tell me. Right. Now, because I can't do this, I can't try to rebuild trust. If I'm going to find out in 6 months or a year or 5 years that there was something else you didn't tell me." He shook his head immediately. "No," he said, "there's nothing else. I swear, Gloria. The job was the only thing. The money from my father was the only financial secret. Everything else in our life was real. Our marriage was real. My love for you was real. The girls were real. I never cheated on you. I never had another. Family. I never gambled away our savings or got into debt or did anything else behind your back. It was just the job, just the wanting to do something meaningful, and not knowing how to tell you and making the catastrophically stupid decision to lie about it instead of being honest. I studied his face looking for any sign that he was lying again, but I couldn't see one. And after 32 years, I like to think I could tell when Marcus was being dishonest, although clearly I'd been wrong about that for the past 6 years. Okay, I said, I believe you about that. At least, now tell me about the money. Tell me exactly where every dollar came from and where it went, because that's one of the things that bothers me most. The financial deception, the making me sign tax returns based on false information. Marcus nodded and pulled out a folder from his bag. I brought all the records, he said, all the bank statements from my father's account, all the records of how much I was actually making at Detroit Community Outreach Center, all the calculations showing how I supplemented my income to make it match what you thought I was making. I want you to see everything. I want there to be no more secrets. He spread the papers out on the table between us and started explaining when my father died. He left me exactly $123,000. He said it was specified in his will that it was just for me, not for both of us. I think he wanted me to have something that was mine, something I could use. However, I wanted, without having to consult anyone, I put it in a separate account at a different bank, and I told myself I was saving it for emergencies. But really, I think I was already planning my exit from Morrison & Associates, even if I didn't consciously know it. Yet he looked at the bank statements, saw the initial deposit of $123,000 10 years ago, saw the monthly withdrawals that had started 6 years ago when Marcus left his accounting job, saw how much was left. Now about $89,000 he'd been using, about $5,000 a year to supplement his income to make up the difference between what he actually made and what I thought he made, and according to his calculations, the money would have lasted another 17 or 18 years, enough to get him to retirement age. When does the money run out? I asked, what happens when you've depleted your father's inheritance and you can't keep up the charade anymore? Marcus looked uncomfortable. That was something I was trying not to think about. He admitted, I kept telling myself I had time to figure it out, time to tell you the truth eventually, time to transition to a life where we could live on my actual salary. But the truth is, I didn't have a plan. Gloria, I was just taking it one day at a time, hoping something would change, hoping I'd find the courage to be honest, hoping you'd somehow figure it out on your own and not be too angry. I was living in this fantasy, where I could have both my meaningful work and my comfortable life, and I never had to make the hard choice between them until you made the choice for me by finding out, so you were just going to keep lying. I said, feeling the anger rise up in my chest again. You were just going to keep deceiving me indefinitely until the money ran out, or until I happened to stumble across the truth the way I did? You weren't ever going to tell me on your own? Were you? Marcus put his head in his hands. I don't. No, he said, honestly, I want to say yes. I want to say I was building up to it. I was planning to tell you eventually. But the truth is, I don't know if I ever would have had the courage. The longer it went on, the harder it became to imagine telling you. The bigger the lie got, the more impossible it seemed to come clean. So maybe you're right. Maybe I would have just kept lying until I couldn't anymore, until something forced the truth out. And Gloria, I know how terrible that is. I know how much that says about me as a husband and as a person, and I'm so deeply ashamed of that. I looked at him, this man I'd loved for more than 3 decades, and I felt such a complicated mix of emotions. Anger, yes, and hurt, and betrayal, but also pity, because he looked so broken, so defeated, so full of genuine remorse. And I wondered if remorse was enough, if being sorry could repair what had been destroyed. Why didn't you just tell me? I asked the question that had been haunting me since the day I found out. Why didn't you come to me 6 years ago and say, Gloria, I'm miserable at Morrison & Associates. I found this meaningful work with veterans and I want to do it full time. Yes, it means less money. Yes, we'll have to adjust our lifestyle, but this is what I need to be happy. Why didn't you trust me enough to have that conversation? Marcus looked up at me, and his eyes were red. Because I was scared, he said, simply because I thought you'd say no. I thought you'd tell me we couldn't afford it. I thought you'd tell me I was being irresponsible. I thought you'd be disappointed in me for wanting to give up a prestigious job for something that paid so much less, and I couldn't bear the thought of disappointing you. Gloria, you've always been so strong, so practical, so focused on security and stability, and I admired that about you. But it also made me feel like I couldn't tell you when I was struggling, when I was unhappy, when I needed something different, because it felt like weakness. It felt like failure. And I didn't want you to see me as weak or as a failure, so I just pretended everything was fine. And then, when I found the work with the veterans, when I found something that actually made me happy, I couldn't bring myself to give it up, but I also couldn't bring myself to tell you. So I did both, and I lied to cover it up, and it was wrong. Gloria, it was so wrong, and I see that now. But at the time, it felt like my only option. But it wasn't your only option, I said, my voice rising again. You had other options. You could have been honest. You could have trusted me. You could have given me a chance to understand, to support you, to work with you, to find a solution together. But you didn't do any of those things. You made a unilateral decision about our life, about our finances, about our future, and then you lied to cover it up for 6 years. Marcus, 6 years of lying every single day, and you're sitting here telling me you did it because you were scared, because you thought I'd be disappointed. Well, guess what? I'm a hell of a lot more disappointed now than I would have been if you just told me the truth. I know, he said quietly. I know, Gloria, and I can't take it back. I can't undo it. All I can do is apologize and promise you that I will never lie to you again, that I will be completely honest from this point forward. No matter how scary it is, no matter how disappointed you might be, I will tell you the truth. Always promises are easy. I said, keeping promises is hard, and you promised to love and honor me when we got married 32 years ago, and you broke that promise. So why should I believe this promise is any different? You shouldn't, he said. And that surprised me. You shouldn't believe me just because I say it. You should only believe me when I show you through my actions, through consistent honesty over time. I can't prove to you right now that I've changed. I can't make you trust me again with words. All I can do is show you day by day, choice by choice, conversation by conversation, that I'm capable of being the honest partner you deserve. And if you'll give me that chance, if you'll let me try to earn back your trust, then I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that I'm worth it. We sat there in that coffee shop for 3 hours, talking, going through every question. I had every concern, every fear. Marcus answered everything, honestly showing me bank records, showing me emails from his work, showing me his termination letter from Detroit Community Outreach Center, showing me his first appointment with his therapist, showing me everything, making his life completely transparent in a way it should have been all along. And slowly, very slowly, I started to feel like maybe there was a path forward. Maybe rebuilding trust was possible, not easy, not quick, but possible. We talked about counseling, about marriage therapy, about seeing someone together who could help us work through the betrayal and the broken trust, and the communication problems that had led us here. Marcus agreed, immediately said he'd go to any therapist I wanted, see anyone I thought could help, do whatever work was necessary. We talked about finances, about living on less money, about what our life would look like if Marcus wasn't making accountant money anymore. I told him I'd been thinking about going back to work myself. I'd stopped working when Shanice was born, had been a stay-at-home mom, and then later had just never gone back. And maybe it was time. Maybe I needed something of my own anyway. Something that wasn't just being Marcus's wife or the girl's mother, something that was mine. We talked about honesty, about creating a relationship where both of us felt safe, telling the truth even when it was hard, even when we were scared of the other person's reaction. I told him about what Shanice had said about how maybe I'd been too rigid, too focused on security, and Marcus immediately tried to defend me, said it wasn't my fault that he'd lied. But I stopped him and said, no, I need to take responsibility for my part in this too. I need to examine whether I created an environment where you felt like you couldn't be honest. And if I did, I need to change that because I don't want a marriage where either of us feels like we have to pretend to be someone we're not. By the time we left the coffee shop, it was after 4, and the dinner crowd was starting to come in, and I felt exhausted but also oddly hopeful. Like maybe this terrible thing that had happened to us could actually be a catalyst for something better. Like maybe we could build a stronger marriage on the ruins of the old one. A marriage based on real honesty and real partnership instead of comfortable routines and unexamined assumptions. I'm not ready for you to come home yet, I told Marcus as we stood in the parking lot. But I'm willing to keep talking. I'm willing to do counseling. I'm willing to see if we can fix this. But Marcus, you need to understand this is going to take years, not weeks or months. Years of proving yourself, years of being honest, years of rebuilding trust. And there's no guarantee it's going to work. There's no guarantee I'm going to be able to forgive you completely or trust you the way I used to. So you need to decide if you're really willing to do that work. If you're really willing to put in the time with no promise of success. I understand, he said. And Gloria, I am willing. I will do whatever it takes for however long it takes, because losing our marriage, that would be the biggest mistake of my life, bigger even than the lying. So yes, I'm committed, I'll do the work. He reached out tentatively and took my hand, and I let him. I let him hold my hand there in the parking lot, and it felt familiar and strange, all at once. Familiar. Because we'd held hands thousands of times over 32 years. Strange because everything had changed, because I was holding hands with a man. I wasn't sure I knew anymore, but I didn't pull away. I stood there and let him hold my hand, and I thought about the future, about the long, difficult road ahead, about the possibility of forgiveness and healing, and maybe eventually trust over. The next few months, Marcus and I started marriage counseling twice a week with a therapist named Dr. Williams, who specialized in infidelity and betrayal. Even though Marcus's situation wasn't a typical affair, Dr. Williams said the dynamics were similar. The lying, the deception, the broken trust, the need to rebuild from the ground up in our sessions. Marcus talked about his fears, his shame, his inability to be vulnerable, his tendency to try to protect me by hiding difficult truths instead of sharing them. I talked about my rigidity, my need for control, my fear of financial instability that came from growing up poor, my tendency to prioritize security over everything else, including happiness. Dr. Williams helped us see how we'd both contributed to a dynamic where honest communication became impossible, where Marcus felt he had to lie, and I felt I had to control, and slowly, painfully, we started to change those patterns. Started to practice being honest, even when it was scary. Started to practice being flexible, even when it was uncomfortable. Marcus got a new job at a different nonprofit. This one focused on housing assistance for low-income families. It paid $45,000 a year, slightly more than Detroit Community Outreach Center, but still significantly less than his old accounting salary. And this time he was completely transparent about it, showed me his offer letter, showed me his pay stubs, included me in every decision about whether to take the job and what it would mean for our finances. And I surprised myself by supporting his choice by telling him that if this work made him happy, then we'd figure out the money situation together as a team. I got a job too at a local library part-time doing administrative work. And it felt good to have something that was mine to contribute financially to our household. To have purpose and structure outside of being a wife and mother. The money wasn't much, but combined with Marcus's salary and careful budgeting, we could make it work. We could pay our bills, save a little, maintain a modest lifestyle, not the comfortable, middle-class life we'd had before, but something simpler, something more honest. 6 months after Marcus moved out, I told him he could come home. It wasn't a grand gesture, wasn't a romantic reunion. He just showed up for one of our twice-weekly dinners. We'd started having where we'd cook together and talk and practice being in each other's company. And at the end of the night I said, "You can move your things back in if you want. Are you sure?" he asked, looking both hopeful and terrified. "I'm sure," I said, I'm not saying everything is fixed. I'm not saying I trust you completely yet. But I think we've made enough progress that we can try living together again. Try being married again, in a real way. Not the pretend way we were doing before he moved back in that weekend, and it was awkward at first. Both of us navigating how to share space again, how to fall back into routines, how to be intimate again, because we hadn't been physically intimate since before I found out about the lies, and that was another thing we had to rebuild slowly, carefully. But we did rebuild it. We took our time, we communicated, we checked in with each other constantly and gradually. The awkwardness faded, and we started to feel like a couple again, like partners, like people who were choosing each other every day. It's been 2 years now since that phone call to Morrison and Associates. Since Janet told me Marcus didn't work there, since my whole world fell apart, and then slowly, painfully came back together, in a different shape. Marcus and I are still in counseling, still working on our marriage, still learning how to be honest with each other, still learning how to trust and be trusted. We're not perfect. We still have hard conversations, still have moments where I doubt whether I made the right choice to stay, still have moments where old resentments surface and I have to work through them all over again. But we're better. We're more honest. We're more real. We know each other in a way we didn't before. When everything was comfortable and easy, and based on assumptions instead of actual communication, our daughters have forgiven their father. Mostly Shanice still watches him, carefully, still asks pointed questions to make sure he's being honest. But she's seen the work he's put in, the changes he's made, and she respects that Keisha has fully embraced. The new version of our family has even started volunteering at the housing nonprofit, where Marcus works, inspired by his commitment to helping others and me. I'm learning to forgive. I'm learning to trust again. I'm learning that people can make terrible mistakes and still be worth loving, that marriages can break and be rebuilt stronger than before. That honesty, even when it comes too late, is better than comfortably. I think about that day. Sometimes the day I called Morrison and Associates, the day my comfortable illusion shattered, the day I learned my husband had been living a double life. And I realize now that as terrible as it was, as painful and devastating and world-ending as it felt in the moment, it was also a gift, because that lie, that comfortable, easy lie, was killing us both. Slowly, Marcus was dying inside, pretending to be someone he wasn't, and I was dying inside. Too, living in a marriage that looked perfect on the outside, but was hollow at the core. We were two people going through the motions of a life together, without actually being honest with each other, without actually being vulnerable with each other, without actually being seen. And the truth, when it finally came out, destroyed the facade, but it also gave us a chance to build something real, something honest, something worth keeping. So yes, Marcus lied to me for 6 years. Yes, he betrayed my trust. In the deepest way possible. Yes, he made choices that nearly destroyed our marriage. But he also, in his own misguided way, was trying to find meaning, was trying to help people, was trying to make his life matter. And when he was finally forced to be honest, when the lies finally came crashing down, he didn't make excuses, didn't blame me, didn't run away. He owned what he'd done. He did the work. He changed. And that's worth something that's worth fighting for. If you're listening to this story and you're going through something similar, if your partner has lied to you, if your world has been shattered by betrayal, if you're trying to decide whether to stay or go, I want you to know that there's no right answer. There's no one-size-fits-all solution to betrayal. Some people can forgive and rebuild, and some people can't. And both choices are valid. Both choices are okay for me. Staying and fighting for my marriage was the right choice, but it might not be the right choice for you. Maybe your partner isn't willing to do the work to change. To be honest, maybe the betrayal is too deep. Maybe you need to start over fresh, without the weight of broken trust holding you down. And if that's your truth, then honor it. Don't stay just because you think you should. Don't stay because of how long you've been together, or because you're scared of being alone. Stay because you want to stay, because you believe the relationship is worth saving. Because you see real change, real remorse, real commitment to being better, but also don't leave just because you're angry. Don't leave in the heat of the moment without giving yourself time to process. Don't leave if there's a part of you that believes healing is possible. Take your time, sit with the pain, sit with the anger, sit with all of it, and then make your choice from a place of clarity, not from a place of raw emotion. What I've learned through all of this is that marriage is complicated, that people are complicated, that sometimes good people make terrible choices, and bad choices don't necessarily make someone a bad person. I've learned that trust once broken takes years to rebuild, but it can be rebuilt if both people are willing to do the work. I've learned that honesty, even painful honesty, is always better than comfortable lies. I've learned that I'm stronger than I thought, that I can survive betrayal, that I can choose to forgive, not because the other person deserves it, but because I deserve peace. I've learned that my daughters are amazing, resilient, compassionate women who can hold space for complexity, who can love their father while also holding him accountable, who can support me while also challenging me to examine my own contributions to our family dynamics. And most importantly, I've learned that it's never too late to start over, to be honest, to build something real. Marcus and I lost 32 years to a marriage that was built on assumptions and comfortable routines and unexamined expectations, but we still have time. We still have the chance to build something better, something honest, something real, and we're taking that chance one day at a time, one honest conversation at a time, one choice at a time. Husband left for work as usual 6 years ago, but he wasn't going where I thought he was. He was living a double life, working a job I didn't know about, using money I didn't know existed, lying to my face every single day. And when I found out, it nearly destroyed us, but nearly isn't the same as completely. And the fact that we're still here, still fighting, still loving each other, still building something real from the ashes of what we had, that means something. It means that love, even wounded, love, even betrayed, love can survive. If both people are willing to be honest, if both people are willing to do the work, if both people are willing to forgive and change and grow. So that's my story. That's how my marriage almost ended, and how we're slowly rebuilding it. That's how I learned that sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the most important growth, that crisis can be opportunity, that breaking can be the first step to becoming whole. And if my story can help someone out there who's dealing with betrayal, who's trying to decide whether to stay or go, who's struggling to rebuild trust after it's been shattered, then every moment of pain was worth it. Because we're not alone, any of us. We're all just trying to love. Imperfect people in an imperfect world, trying to build something lasting, trying to trust when we've been hurt, trying to forgive when we've been betrayed. And that's the most human thing there is. Did you like my story, and which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks, so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story on the screen. You can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.